let's revisit grids. So grids are really the basic of good design. If you think about the rule of thirds in photography and visuals, that is what grids are to design. They help balance, they help align content, they help focus the designer on how to place content and provide white space, a way to give the eyes a break for the viewers. You can also use grids to help divide content with levels of spacing and establishing hierarchy. Without order, your design is just confusing clutter. So in this video, we're going to look at different types of grid design, including 2-column and 3-column, as well as 4-column and a double page spread. So first, let's show you how you set your grids up. The first way is when you're creating a new document. So as soon as you have your new document dialog open, if you scroll down, you'll see that you can set number of columns right here. Those number of columns are the same as your vertical grids. You can also set your margins. So that's the first way. Now let's say you forget to set your columns or you need to change them. If you go to Layout, Margins and Columns, you can set them here. So this is the same as that new document dialog. You can also use the Layout Create guides to create both rows and columns. Now in this video, we're going to focus mainly on that vertical grid. Finally, if you are using parent pages, you can set up your grids on your parent page and it will apply to all the pages that have that parent applied. Now that we've looked at the basics, let's jump into some design. So your main rule for designing with grids is you don't want to break the grid. So let's first find out where that grid is. In this case, we have a 2-column grid. So breaking that grid would be if we did things like designed like that. It is breaking this column. Now we could stretch an object across both columns and that would be fine. Another consideration as you're building designs is text on that grid. So for example, we're not breaking the grid here, but that text box is really, really wide. So this might be a time for us to break that into columns. To do that, we'll go over to our Properties panel and we'll scroll down to where we see Text Frame. That is perfectly on grid. That would be breaking the grid. So here we have a pretty simple 2-column vertical grid. Let's look at another way to play with this vertical grid and talk about ways you can start to think about breaking that grid a little bit. And here's another use of that 2-column grid. Now let's switch this design to 3 columns and experiment again. And there's another example of a 3-column. Finally, let's go to our 4-column grid. And there's an example of a 4-column grid. So one of the things I'm hoping you're seeing is the more columns you have, kind of the more flexibility you have to do some pretty interesting things. So keep that in mind. Let's go ahead and move on to our double page spread. So you can see on this double page spread, I'm actually working on a 6-column grid on each part of the double page spread. So one of the things I can do when I'm working with double page spreads is really utilize larger images, and I can start to think about how I might want to break photos across that spread. And so having a large dominant photo is a really great idea with a double page spread. Another critical thing to consider in the double page spread is giving some eye lines. And so these would be spaces where viewers can move clear across the page. So as I'm setting up, I think this to the left of the photo and below the photo might be some good parts to start thinking about creating a nice eye line that goes clear across the spread. And of course, another thing to consider is if you have the ability to do bleed photos, then you can stretch photos clear across the page. Now, one of the things I haven't been doing with these designs is really creating designed headlines. I'm just filling space right now, but of course, another consideration is how that headline is going to look once you have some really fun design working with it. Part of working with grids is also setting up hierarchy. So I know that my other images are going to need to be smaller than my large dominant image. So I'm keeping that in mind as I work with these images. Another thing to start thinking about as you build a double page spread is how you can use levels of spacing. So levels of spacing keeps content that is similar together while content that is different is separated. So right now I've been mainly working on just having one pica of separation between all pieces of content. And I may want to change that as I add other pieces of content to this design. So I'm still keeping an eye on where all of my grids are and considering how these two will balance together and making sure I have enough space. The one thing that cannot cross the gutter on a double page spread is your text. So I'm going to bring that into the inside. And so when it comes to this block of text, I have a couple of different things I can do with that as far as the text frame size. It is too large, so 2 columns would work on that grid, but see, I'm losing this eye line here. I'm keeping this one, but I've lost this eye line. So I think we need to make some changes here. Now 3 columns works great with that eye line, but this subhead is a problem. So maybe this subhead will only live in these 2 columns here, and the headline can fill up all of the space over here. So as you design, just keep thinking about that problem. Another thing to consider is adding a little more on that external margin so it doesn't feel as tight. So let's look at how we could do that on this page. So leaving just a little space there can be a nice break for the audience. Now, if I were looking at different levels of spacing, let's say this was like a side package, bringing that down so it has a few more bits of space there is always a great idea. Now notice on all of these designs, one of the things I've done is my text is never trapped by photos. That's another thing you want to think about as you work with your grids and design. So hopefully that gives you some good ideas on how you can use your grid, how you can manipulate your grid, and get really dynamic designs.